Dwayne Johnson had always been known for his larger-than-life presence, both on screen and off. But beyond the muscles, the fame, and the Hollywood glamour, he had a heart just as massive. He never forgot the people who stood by him, especially those who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. One such person was Mark Reynolds, a security guard who had worked for Dwayne for years. Mark was no ordinary employee. He was more like family, someone who had been by Dwayne's side through thick and thin. From movie premieres to private events, Mark had dedicated his life to ensuring the superstar's safety. But while the world saw Dwayne as a billionaire actor and businessman, very few knew about the people who helped him get there. And even fewer knew about Mark's struggles. For months, Mark had been hiding a terrible secret. He was drowning in debt. His wife had fallen ill, and the medical bills had piled up faster than he could manage. He had tried everything: overtime shifts, cutting down on expenses, even selling his car. But it was never enough. The hospital bills kept coming, and soon he was faced with a harsh reality: bankruptcy. Mark had always been a proud man. He had never asked for help, even when things got bad. But lately, he had been slipping. His focus at work had suffered, his usual upbeat attitude had faded, and the stress was beginning to take a toll on his health. Dwayne noticed. One night, after a long day on set, Dwayne was about to head home when he saw Mark sitting alone near his car, staring at the ground. It was unusual. Mark was always the first to leave after ensuring Dwayne was safe. Sensing something was wrong, Dwayne walked over and sat beside him. "Talk to me, man," Dwayne said, his deep voice laced with concern. Mark hesitated. He didn't want to burden Dwayne with his problems, but there was something about the way Dwayne looked at him, something genuine, that made it impossible to keep it all inside. He took a deep breath and finally let it all out. The medical bills, the sleepless nights, the fear of losing everything. Dwayne listened silently, nodding as Mark spoke. When he was done, there was a long pause. Then, without hesitation, Dwayne reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a call. "Hey, I need my accountant to transfer something," he said. Mark's eyes widened. "Dwayne, no, I can't let you." Dwayne held up a hand. "Mark, you've had my back for years. Now, it's my turn." Mark was speechless. He had spent years protecting Dwayne, never expecting anything in return. And now, the man he had sworn to protect was about to change his life. But what Dwayne did next went beyond anything Mark could have ever imagined. The next morning, Mark woke up to a call from his bank. His heart pounded as he hesitated to answer. He was already expecting bad news. Maybe another overdue notice. Maybe a final warning before things spiraled even further out of control. But when he finally answered, what he heard left him frozen in place. "Mr. Reynolds," the banker said, "there has been a substantial deposit made to your account." Mark sat up straight. "What? From who?" The banker gave him the number associated with the transaction, and Mark immediately recognized it. His hands started shaking. It was Dwayne. He fumbled to open his banking app, and when the screen loaded, his breath caught in his throat. His account, which had been in the negative just yesterday, now showed a balance he never thought he'd see. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. More than enough to clear his debts, pay off the medical bills, and even have something left to rebuild his life. Tears filled Mark's eyes. He knew Dwayne was generous, but this was something else. Before he could even process it, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Dwayne himself. "Don't say a word, just use it. Your family comes first. See you at work." Mark covered his face with his hands, overwhelmed. He had spent years protecting a man who never truly needed protection, not physically at least. But now, that same man had given him something far more valuable than money: hope. By the time Mark arrived at work that afternoon, he was still reeling from what had happened. He didn't know what to say. How do you thank someone for saving your life? For giving you back everything you thought you'd lost? Dwayne was already on set, getting ready for a shoot when Mark found him. The superstar was laughing with the crew, but as soon as he spotted Mark, his expression softened. Mark took a deep breath and walked up to him. "Dwayne, He struggled to find the words. "I don't know how to—" Dwayne clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Then don't." Mark looked at him, still in disbelief. "I don't deserve this, man. I was just doing my job." Dwayne shook his head. "No, Mark. You were looking out for me before I even knew I needed looking out for. You've been family since day one." Mark swallowed the lump in his throat. He had spent so long thinking he had to handle everything alone, that asking for help meant weakness. But Dwayne had shown him something different. That real strength wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about knowing when to lean on the people who truly cared. And just when Mark thought Dwayne's generosity had reached its peak, the superstar did something even more shocking. Something that would change Mark's life forever. Later that evening, as the set wrapped up, Dwayne called Mark over. The usual lively atmosphere had settled, and most of the crew had already left. It was just the two of them now, standing under the bright studio lights. "You got a minute?" Dwayne asked, his tone serious but warm. Mark nodded. "Of course." Dwayne leaned against a nearby table, arms crossed over his chest. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me yesterday, about your family, your wife's medical bills, and everything you've been dealing with." Mark sighed, running a hand over his short-cropped hair. "Yeah, it's been rough, man. I didn't know how I was going to get out of it." Dwayne studied him for a moment before nodding. "Well, you don't have to worry about that anymore." Mark frowned. "Dwayne, I already told you. What you did was more than enough. I can't let you do anything else." Dwayne chuckled. "See, that's the thing. I wasn't asking." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I need you to take a look at this." Mark hesitated before taking it. As he unfolded the paper, his eyes scanned the contents, and suddenly his breath caught in his throat. It was a deed, a house deed, with his name on it. He blinked rapidly, trying to process what he was seeing. "Dwayne, what is this?" Dwayne grinned. "That, my friend, is the key to your new home. Paid in full. No mortgage, no stress. Just a fresh start for you and your family." Mark's legs nearly gave out beneath him. He gripped the paper tightly, his vision blurring as tears welled up. "You bought me a house." His voice was barely a whisper. Dwayne shrugged as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Yeah, figured you could use some peace of mind. Your wife needs to recover. Your kids need stability. And you? You've spent years taking care of me. It's about time someone took care of you." Mark shook his head in disbelief. "Dwayne, this is too much. I can't accept this." Dwayne's expression turned serious. "Mark, listen to me. You've never once asked for anything. Not a raise, not favors, not even a damn day off when you should have. You put everyone else first. But this time, you're going to accept it. Not because you need to, but because you deserve it." Mark's chest felt heavy, like the weight of the world had suddenly been lifted. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe again. He swallowed hard and wiped at his eyes. "I don't even know what to say, man." Dwayne smiled and pulled him into a firm hug. "Then don't say anything. Just go home and tell your wife she never has to worry again." And with that, Mark realized something. He hadn't just been working for a Hollywood star all these years. He had been working for a true friend. But little did he know, Dwayne wasn't finished yet. There was still one more surprise waiting for him. The drive home felt surreal. Mark gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind still struggling to process everything that had just happened. His wife, Sarah, had no idea what was coming. She had spent countless nights awake, worrying about their future, crying over the bills they couldn't pay, and now, just like that, everything had changed. As he pulled into their small rental house, he sat in the car for a moment, taking deep breaths. He didn't want to walk in overwhelmed. He wanted to be strong for Sarah, for his kids. But how could he? How do you tell your wife that the man you've been working for just gave you a home? Pushing open the door, he stepped inside. The dim light from the living room barely illuminated Sarah, who was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. The exhaustion on her face was evident. Mark felt a pang of guilt. She had been carrying this burden for so long, and he hadn't been able to do anything about it. Until now. "Hey, babe," she said softly, looking up at him. "You're home late." Mark walked over, kneeling beside her. "Yeah, had a long day, but something happened." She frowned, immediately sensing the shift in his voice. "What is it?" Mark hesitated for a second before pulling out the folded deed from his pocket. He handed it to her without a word. Sarah sat up straight, unfolding the paper with tired, shaking hands. Her eyes moved across the page slowly at first, then faster, as if she wasn't sure she was reading it right. Then her breath hitched. "Mark?" Her voice cracked. "What is this?" "It's ours," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Dwayne, he bought us a house. It's completely paid for." Sarah covered her mouth with her hands, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at him in disbelief. "No," she whispered, "that's not possible." Mark nodded. "It is. He did it, just like that. Said we deserve a fresh start, no debt, no worries, just a real home." A sob escaped Sarah's lips as she clutched the paper to her chest. Mark reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as she cried. He could feel her body shaking against him, years of stress and fear pouring out in a flood of emotions. "We're okay now," he murmured against her hair. "We don't have to struggle anymore." Their two kids, awakened by the noise, peeked into the room. "Mom? Dad?" their youngest asked sleepily. Sarah wiped her tears quickly and looked at them with a trembling smile. "Come here, babies." The two little ones climbed onto the couch, curling into their parents' arms, oblivious to the life-changing news. Mark kissed the top of their heads, his heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt truly free. But as he sat there with his family, basking in the miracle that had just unfolded, his phone buzzed again. Another message from Dwayne. "Still not done, brother. Be at the office tomorrow. Got one more thing for you." Mark stared at the screen, his heart pounding. What could possibly be left? Dwayne had already saved him from financial ruin. He had already given him a home. What else could the superstar possibly have in store? The next morning, Mark barely slept. His mind was racing with thoughts of what Dwayne could possibly have planned. The house alone was already too much. What more could the superstar do? Still, he knew better than to question it. When Dwayne Johnson made a promise, he followed through. Mark arrived at the studio earlier than usual, his heart pounding as he walked into Dwayne's private office. The Rock was sitting behind a massive desk, typing something on his phone. When he looked up and saw Mark, he grinned. "Good, you're here," Dwayne said, setting his phone down. "How's Sarah?" Mark exhaled deeply. "She cried all night, man. Happy tears. She still thinks this is all a dream." Dwayne chuckled. "Nah, this is real, and I meant what I said. It's only the beginning." Mark shifted in his seat, still struggling to accept the generosity being thrown his way. "Dwayne, seriously, I don't know how to thank you for everything. The house alone—" Dwayne held up a hand. "Hold that thought. I need to ask you something first." He leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Mark, how long have you been doing security?" Mark frowned, caught off guard by the question. Close to 20 years now." Dwayne nodded. And in those 20 years, how many times have you put yourself in danger for someone else? Mark hesitated. He never liked thinking about it, but the truth was, there had been plenty of times, fights, crazy fans, potential threats. More times than I can count, he admitted. Exactly. Dwayne sat back in his chair, crossing his arms. You've spent your whole life protecting people. You know this industry better than anyone. You're not just some bodyguard, Mark. You're one of the best. And I think it's time you got something more for it. Mark tilted his head. What are you talking about? Dwayne grinned and slid a folder across the desk. I pulled some strings, made some calls. What you're looking at is the paperwork for your own private security firm. Mark's breath caught in his throat. His own security firm? He hesitated before opening the folder. Inside were legal documents, business registration forms, even a logo with his name on it. Reynolds Elite Security. Mark blinked, stunned. Dwayne, this isn't real. It's real, Dwayne said firmly. I put down the initial investment, got you a few big-name clients to start with, some of my friends in Hollywood who need top-tier security. All you gotta do is run it. Mark shook his head, still struggling to comprehend what was happening. I've never run a business before. Dwayne smirked. And I'd never acted before I became The Rock. But here we are. Mark let out a shaky laugh, his eyes still locked on the papers in front of him. This was life-changing. Owning his own security company meant financial independence, a future for his family, and finally being his own boss. Dwayne leaned forward, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder. You've spent your whole life protecting other people's dreams, Mark. Now it's time to chase your own. Tears burned in Mark's eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Instead, he swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. Let's do this. Dwayne's face lit up with a proud grin. That's what I wanted to hear, brother. And just like that, Mark Reynolds went from being a security guard to the owner of his own elite protection agency. But even with his new future secured, there was one last thing Dwayne wanted to do, one final gesture that would seal their friendship forever. A week later, Mark stood in front of a brand-new office building with his name on the glass door, Reynolds Elite Security. The past few days had been a whirlwind of emotions, paperwork, and phone calls. Dwayne had set everything in motion, but Mark was the one who had to take the wheel now. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The office was modern, sleek and fully furnished. Another surprise from Dwayne. A receptionist's desk stood at the entrance, a waiting area to the right. And down the hall were private offices and a conference room. You like it? Mark turned to see Dwayne standing at the door, arms crossed, a satisfied grin on his face. Mark exhaled a shaky laugh. I still can't believe this is real. Dwayne clapped a hand on his shoulder. Believe it, brother. You earned this. Mark looked around again, his mind still struggling to catch up. Just a week ago, he had been drowning in debt, wondering how he was going to keep his family afloat. Now, he owned a home, was debt-free, and had his own company. I don't know how to thank you, man, Mark admitted. You've given me more than I ever dreamed of. Dwayne smirked. Well, I'm not done yet. Mark's eyes widened. Dwayne, come on, man. Relax, relax. Dwayne laughed, pulling out a small box from his pocket. This one's not about money. Mark hesitated before taking the box. He opened it slowly, and his breath caught in his throat. Inside was a custom-made gold watch, engraved with the words, Brotherhood is more than blood. Thank you for always having my back. DJ. Mark swallowed hard, his chest tightening with emotion. He ran his fingers over the engraving, speechless. Dwayne nudged him playfully. Figured you could use something to remind you that no matter how big this company gets, you're still family. Mark blinked rapidly, trying to keep his emotions in check. You really didn't have to do this. Dwayne grinned. I know, but I wanted to. For the first time in a long time, Mark felt something he hadn't in years. Security. Not just financial security, but the kind that came from knowing someone had his back, no matter what. He slipped the watch onto his wrist and looked at Dwayne. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you for everything you've done. Dwayne shook his head. You already did. For years. I'm just returning the favor. The two men shared a firm handshake, which quickly turned into a hug. As Dwayne turned to leave, he glanced back with a smirk. By the way, I'm your first official client. Think you can handle it? Mark grinned. Brother, I was born for this. And just like that, a new chapter of his life began, one built not on luck but on loyalty, friendship, and the power of paying it forward. In a world where loyalty is rare, stories like this remind us that true friendship can change lives. Dwayne Johnson didn't just help Mark, he gave him a future, and that's the power of looking out for the people who've always had your back. But now, I want to hear from you. If you had the chance to change someone's life forever, who would it be and why? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in paying it forward, hit that subscribe button. Not because I said so, but because generosity creates legacies. Stay kind, stay powerful. On fire.